while you're voting, if you can still keep half an open mind to our summing up speeches, they are going to go in reverse order. Speakers, it can be difficult because there's that murmur of voting going on, but I'm going to ask you to soldier on. Roger Cohen, 2 minutes to sum up, if you would, and perhaps you might want to address the question that came from there about what's the evidence that Jewish opinion is shifting in the United States. If you can keep the murmur as low as possible, people can still have their minds made up. Roger Cohen.
Well, I think the two last questions illustrated quite well why the United States has to remain involved. One about, what about Europe? Why not Europe? Europe is agonizing at the moment, trying to deal with its own Euro problems, and certainly not ready, I think, to play a prominent role. And then we had the lady here talking about some of the vile incitement that goes on. It goes on both sides. And what's that an illustration of? It's an illustration, and I know this, having been foreign editor of the New York Times and gotten it from all sides, and then gotten it from all sides as a columnist. There is no conflict in the world that stirs such passionate feelings on either side. And to think that any agreement can be reached without it being midwifed by the world's surviving great power, I think, as I said, is illusory. Ladies and gentlemen, there are no rights of return in history. There's no right of return of the Jews to Judea and Samaria. There is no right of return of a Palestinian to Haifa. There is no right of return of a Jew to Alexandria or a German to Wrocław or a Greek to Smyrna. No, history moves on. It is painful to admit it, but history moves on. And the only way you emerge from cycles of conflict, gyres of growing violence, such as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, is through hard-headed compromise. Narrative doesn't get you to compromise. Incitement doesn't get you to compromise. Invoking the Nakba, invoking the Holocaust doesn't get you to compromise. You have to have hard-headed, pragmatic deal-making done. In my view, that kind of deal-making with the kinds of guarantees necessary cannot be done without the active, consistent, purposeful presence of the United States. And if you believe that there is no way that peace can be achieved without that presence, then you should vote against the motion tonight. People say, look at our opponents have said it all evening. Look at what the United States has been doing for the last 30, 40 years. Can never work, never work, never work. It's dangerous to say things can never work in history. Germany and France went to war 5 times between 1870 and 1945. Now it's unthinkable. And in the end, the United States played a central role in putting an end to that. You drive from Germany to Poland today, Germany to Poland, without being aware of a border. I simply don't believe that past failure means there cannot be future success.
Thank you. We're into closing arguments to persuade or sway those last few voters. Mustafa Barghouti, perhaps you might sum up your case for the motion, but also address the points that came your way. One of them was incitement, but another one was how can you expect Hamas to be accepted on the Israeli side given that they refuse to accept Israel? That's how the questioner put it.
Well, first of all, let me say that I know that most of you have voted already, but still I want to make this argument. And I hope you will support the motion if you haven't voted yet. But I think the United States, in this case, I will not repeat what we said, which is that why the United States is doing wrong things, etc. But one very important point is that the continuation of this existing role of the United States, the way it is practically paralyzing and preventing others from playing a positive role. We have seen that with the European Union, where the United States blocked, literally, interventions from the side of the European Union or even by the United Nations. We've seen situations when the United States manipulated the decision of the European Union by their influence on certain countries, knowing very well that a decision requires consensus inside the European Union. So practically there is a proactive pro-Israeli role which is counterproductive and destructive for both the future of the Palestinians and Israelis. And that's why we want to change the situation. If we had any hope that the United States policy will change and that the United States Congress will change in the course of the coming 5 years, I would be asking you to vote against the motion. But in reality, our opponents could not show any single sign of progress in that regard. Actually, what we see, given what William described as Gingrich statements and other statements of those who are running to become presidents of the United States, is actually showing a very negative course of deterioration of the possibility of America playing a positive role in this case. We don't deny the role of the United States. We don't want to ignore the United States. We don't want to marginalize the United States. Actually, we want to do more work with the people in the United States, with Jeremy, and with others to change the situation, but not to put our hopes on an illusion. On the question of incitement, I'm worried and afraid that what you are saying here is nothing but a repetition of an old Israeli propaganda. I can tell you, I can repeat to you, I can gather hundreds of statements made by Israeli leaders like Lieberman, or by Israeli religious leaders who describe Palestinians as cockroaches. But it's not a game of blame here. The issue here today is that we've done a big progress. Hamas changed. They accept two-state solution. And I don't know why there is such strong resistance to recognizing change. Change is positive, and we should appreciate it. And today the majority of Palestinians support two-state solution. This is what we should care about. And we should encourage that, rather than deny it and deny that positive change. But if I was an Israeli, or if I was a Jewish person, I would today feel, of course, I would feel embarrassed, I would feel a great amount of discomfort, because there is nothing to be proud about in creating an apartheid system in the 21st century. There is nothing to be proud about in having the longest occupation in modern history. And that's why I say we want to liberate not only ourselves, but also our Jewish and Israeli neighbors from this horrible system. It's not against them. It's for their future. It's to end this situation of injustice and to truly have a situation where we will all feel quite comfortable at one point of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. The votes are being counted, and because so many of you have turned up tonight, it may take slightly longer than it would have done. So I think we're going to be ready in 3 or 4 minutes, but 2 more closing speeches to hear. Jeremy Ben-Ami, I want you to answer that very first question that came from there, which is, what is the evidence that US opinion is shifting, particularly US Jewish liberal opinion? And is your understanding the same as Mustafa Barghouti's, which is, he just said that Hamas do accept 2 states. Is that your understanding? And please also sum up your case against the motion.
Well, thanks, Jonathan. There's so much that's in play here that it's almost hard to know how to take 2 or 3 minutes and summarize everything. I think I would make 3 basic points. One is, I hope that it's clear that the status quo is unsustainable. And it's unsustainable on all fronts. For the United States, it's simply unacceptable for the world's sole superpower to be in the position where all of us, and probably all of you, agree that it has been proven impotent and failing over the course of the last 40 years to solve this problem. And so from an American national interest, as an American, I can say this has to change. So that status quo has to change. For the Palestinian people, the status quo that they live under every single day is simply unacceptable, and I share Mustafa Barghouti's hope that a nonviolent, popular movement will emerge that carries as its flag a two-state solution. I don't agree that the global BDS movement has in its charter the recognition of the State of Israel. In fact, it is the undermining of the existence and the right of the Jewish people to a national homeland. I'd like to see that website and that charter amended to say we are doing this for a two-state solution. So the status quo has to change for the Palestinians. It needs to change within these movements so that those of us who care about a Jewish and a democratic Israel don't feel that the movement is designed to eliminate Israel altogether, but to find a Palestine alongside of the state of Israel. Third, the status quo is unsustainable for Israel. It's an Israeli national interest to have a two-state solution, to have it now before it's too late. And so for all of these reasons, for America's national interest, for the Palestinian movement, and for the Israelis, the status quo is unsustainable, has to change, and I think we hear that all across the board. One place I can say it is changing is in the American Jewish community, where 5 years ago you didn't hear my voice. And you didn't have 180,000 people as part of our movement. And you didn't have a political action committee that supports our view be the largest pro-Israel political action committee in the United States. You didn't have hundreds and hundreds of Jewish college students organizing around a pro-Israel, pro-peace message. So things are beginning to change. There's a recognition among American Jews that all of these status quos are unsustainable. America's going to have to be involved if we're going to fix that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very cool. Thank you. Through the extraordinary efficiency of Intelligence Squared, I have here, in the famous phrase, a piece of paper. Different context, I know. And so, William C. Gott, if you close up and sum up as efficiently as you can, then I can tell people the outcome.
It's a bizarre system, isn't it, when you're summing up, but the vote is already in front of you. But just to clarify something briefly, I sat less than 6 months ago with the Hamas leadership when they were being questioned by some senior Western diplomats and retired politicians. And one of them, the first question was, of course, why won't you recognize the right of Israel to exist? And I will tell you verbatim what the Hamas leader said. He said, first of all, which Israel? To which the diplomat said, what do you mean? He said, well, which Israel? An Israel which occupies the whole of the West Bank and Gaza, the Palestinian state, or an Israel on 1967 borders? And then he said, a Jewish state, one that recognizes only the rights of Jews, or one that equally recognizes the rights of Jews, Christians, and Muslims? And finally, he said, you talk about the right to exist. We always question what that means. He said, we'll never recognize the right of the Nakba to us, the fact that we all lost our land and our homes. You wouldn't have expected anybody who'd lost their land and their homes to recognize the right of it. We may be able to live side by side with Israel, but we can't recognize the right of the loss of our farms and our homes and our land. So that, I hope, gives you at least a sensible answer of what these people think. Secondly, I was with an Israeli only a few days ago and talking to him about this debate and talking about the US's supposed ability or inability to play a even-handed role. And he said, tell the audience this: when I served in the Israeli army, almost every single weapon I handled said on it, property of the United States. Now, Roger and Jeremy have asked you not to let frustration influence your vote. I sure as hell hope it has. They want us to wait until after the United States presidential election in November and hope against hope somehow that the new president, whoever that may be, will stand up and do it all differently. And let's imagine, for the sake of argument, that the winner is the current president, and he begins his new term of office as at the beginning of his first term, and he decides to try and move things along in this conflict. What will his advisors tell him? They will tell him that his priority is to ensure that the Democrats retake Congress in 2014. And upsetting the Jewish vote by putting pressure on Israel will jeopardize this. Come 2014, his congressional allies will tell him he'll be gone in 2016, and pressure on the Jewish vote will threaten the democratic future. And the tragedy for this conflict with America in charge is that you're never more than 2 or 3 years away from a US election. You cannot ask millions of Palestinians and Israelis to wait for the US to do it differently. Waiting for the United States is like waiting for Godot, and Godot never came.
Thank you, William. Okay. So, the outcome of tonight's debate, the don't knows began on 212, and that number has plummeted to 42. The against vote, against the motion that Uncle Sam should butt out, it was 163. It zoomed up to 260. But the motion, the support for the motion, those voting for Uncle Sam to butt out, were 243 in number. And that number too has gone up to 307. So 307 beats 260. So the motion that the best chance for peace between Israel and Palestine is for Uncle Sam to butt out has been carried. I think the last thing left for us to do is to thank 4 extraordinarily good, powerful and moving speakers, William Seagart, Mustafa Barghouti, Jeremy Bennett, and Roger Cohen. Thank you all very much. Good night.